And sometimes they help, but sometimes they just don't. I guarantee you, on your team right now, you have some kid who does all the drills right, but doesn't sprint correctly. Is that correct? Yeah. And that's a fact, and that happens all the time. And the reason why that happens is because of the way our bodies are kind of hardwired. You know, our bodies, we kind of operate two ways. We can operate volitionally, meaning that we're moving our bodies the way we want them to move, but then we also have reflexes. And the faster you sprint, the more the reflexes take over. So drills are done at a certain speed that's kind of where you kind of have control of your movement patterns. But when you start sprinting, your reflexes kind of take over. So there's a difference there. So the real trick to getting your kids to sprint the way you want them to sprint is you have to actually teach them to sprint while they're sprinting. You know, you have to actually work with them while they're running. You know, when they're sprinting, you have to, you know, after every repetition, you need to talk to them, make corrections, you know, give whatever cues you need to give. Go ahead, Phil, thanks. And anyway, that's ultimately what you have to do. You know, if we're trying to just do the drills and then hope the drills cross over into the sprint, that's really the slow way to do it. And actually, it never really works completely, okay? So that being said, when you have an athlete and you're trying to teach them how to sprint, sometimes it's a very scary thing because you see all of these things that they do wrong, you just don't know where to start. You got some of those, right? You know, you have the kid who doesn't get the knees up. You have the kid that has the butt out. You have the kid with the wild arms. You have all of those different things, you know, and it's kind of like one of these situations where do I begin, you know? So whenever I look at an athlete and I start to teach them sprint mechanics, I always break the things down into 4 categories, okay? The first category are what I call pathological things, pathological. Pathological means that the reason why the sprinting looks goofy is not because you didn't coach them right, it's because there's something that's not quite right with their bodies. So if you have a kid who's not strong enough yet, or if you have a kid who has flexibility problems, or a kid who has mobility problems, or maybe they're really strong in the front of their body and weak in the back, or maybe they have real strong legs and weak core. Basically, there's something about the body that's not just quite right yet. And if that's the case, they're going to sprint goofy. Their sprinting mechanics are going to be bad. And you might be the best coach in the world as far as like teaching sprint mechanics, but you're not going to be successful. Now, you're a throws coach, aren't you? Didn't you say you're a throws coach?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this quick question. When you coach your shot putters, do you teach them to use their legs?
They have to.
Of course, they have to.
Yeah.
But if the kid squats 200 and bench presses 400, well, good luck with that, right?
Yeah.
And you see, that's not going to work because they're not built to execute it. So sometimes our athletes are not built to execute it. So a lot of times I'll get a question like this. You know, my kid, when they run, you know, one arm works right, but the other arm goes wide. Or that toe turns out on that right side or something like that. You know, should I focus on those things? And the answer is really no. Those are the kind of things that over time go away if you're doing the training side of it correctly. So if you're doing your flexibility drills and your hurdle walkovers and you're doing your sprint drills and you're doing your weights and you're doing your plyos and all those things, over the course of time, those kinds of things tend to go away. You know, and here's my advice to you as a coach too. If you're working with maybe 12 kids and 10 of them or 11 of them are progressing and looking better and there's one that's kind of stuck, don't beat yourself up too bad. You know, sometimes this is the stuff that's the problem. This is the stuff that's the issue. And it's just going to take a little bit more time. You know, I remember when I was real young and this is 30 years ago, when I first started working with really good athletes, I would be out there teaching them how to do accelerations, man. And I'd be out there and I'd be coaching my butt off. They'd sprint, I'd coach. They'd sprint, I'd coach, you know. And there was a lot of talking going on and a lot of teaching, and the kids got better, and they got a lot better, improved a lot. But then, you know how it is when you get coaching, you know, a few years later, you're a little more tired, you shut up a little more, you talk a little less, you know, and I found that they got better just as fast when I was talking less. And that's when I started to understand that because we were doing the flexibility stuff and because we were doing the drills and because we were doing the weights and all those kind of things, that a lot of the improvements that I thought came because I was talking to them a lot were actually coming because the training was having its effect, you know. So in short, our philosophically, what we look at here is we don't look at sprint mechanics as something that's really mystical, something that's really complicated. You know, I always ask track coaches, who taught you to run? And most of the time the track coach raises up their hand and they throw out the name of some middle school track coach that you had. But that's not true. Who really taught you to run? The answer is nobody. One day you just did it. You know, you were 4 years old or 3 years old and you just did it. And that's our philosophy here, is that we're designed to run. As humans, we're designed to run. So it's about building the body to do what it should be able to do naturally and not to overcomplicate things, okay? Because when you overcomplicate things, kids start thinking too much and there's a problem. And sometimes it just means that the training just has to take effect before we can see the changes that we want. So as far as teaching sprint mechanics, we just try to keep it real simple, limited to a few key things, and then from that point on, we just progress, all right? Because if, you know, we would never sign any sprinter if we went out there and told them you have to do 100 different things correctly in order to run fast. But if I tell them that we have a good training program and we only have to do 3 or 4 key technical things in order to be successful, well then things tend to fall in place, okay? So the pathological stuff we don't worry about. We kind of let the training take care of that, okay? Second thing, a lot of the things in sprinting are dictated by other things. We call these self-organizing factors. So a lot of the things like arm movements, for example, a lot of the things like recovery heights and so forth, we don't address those a lot. And the reason why is because normally if you do the important things in sprinting right, then the body finds out how to do those other things by themselves, okay? In sprinting, I understand we have, you know, we didn't always think this. 30 years ago, we felt differently. But in sprinting, we know that the arms follow the legs. It's not the other way around. So therefore, if you can take an athlete and you get them to do the right things with their legs and strike the ground at the correct angles and so forth, well then the arms just kind of find where they're supposed to be, and normally the arms will be just fine. On the other hand, if you show me a sprinter who has really bad arms, almost always I can show you some really bad problems with what they're doing from the waist down. So that being said, things like recovery heights and arms, we don't stress a lot. You know, every once in a while we might have to say a little bit about it, but it's not our primary focus, you know. If you have a kid with tight hips, they're always gonna have wild arms. So if I get the hips loose, then the arms are gonna calm down. That's just how the body's designed to operate. So that being said, you know, we try to identify the things that we don't really have to spend a lot of time on and figure out what are the things we do, okay? Now the third group of things that we consider are what we call global factors. Global factors mean things that we always have to do, things that are always important to us. And they aren't necessarily the skills we teach, but they are the things that are, they are the context in which we teach. They're not necessarily the material, but they're the classroom in which you teach sprinting, okay? Those would be things like ranges of motion and posture and those types of things, okay? We'll talk about those shortly. And then finally, after all of that, you have the skills. What are the things you actually need to teach? And by the time we get all that other stuff out of the way, when we look at the skills, we're down to only 2 or 3 key things. And that, again, makes it much easier for the athletes to learn because of the fact that we simplified that list, okay? So today we're not really gonna talk about the pathological stuff, and we're not gonna talk about the self-organizing stuff, but we will talk about the other 2 categories, okay? Now, when we look at it, let's look at the global factors first, okay? There are 3 key global factors in sprinting that we constantly look at and we constantly address. The first one are the ranges of motion, the amplitudes of movement, you know? Every one of you at some time in your life has taken a nail, taken a piece of wood, and taken a hammer and driven that nail into that piece of wood, right? When you did it, you didn't do it like this, did you? How'd you do it? You used a big, strong stroke, right? Our bodies are designed to work through big ranges of motion. So we use a term here when we teach sprinting called openness. We always want the sprint to be open at all times. And when we say openness, what we mean is range of motion in the hip. I'm sure all of you, when you teach sprinting, you teach your athletes to get their knees up when they sprint, correct? Okay. So you're getting your knees up, and you should, that's correct. But have you ever thought about knees down? Because it's when the knee moves down that you're actually pushing against the ground. You know, if you look at a good sprinter, when they push down, the knee moves behind the hip a little bit. So what we see is the knee behind the hip and the knee nice and high. So if we were gonna look at what that thigh was doing, we would see that thigh moving through a big range of motion. Is that clear? Yeah, and that's the key point here, is that that big range of motion should never be small. Should always be big. So we're always talking to them about openness. Openness meaning open between the thighs, feeling split at the end of every stride, so that we can maximize our stride length, and also we have more power and force as we hit the ground, because of the fact that we're working with a longer arm, we're working with a longer hammer. Is that clear? Okay, so what we do is when we teach sprinting, from the very first step out of the blocks until the very end of the race, we always emphasize that openness. And we never ever want to compromise that. Everything else we teach it within the context of that, and we never want that to change, okay? Number two, that's very important to us, is posture. The posture, the alignment of the body's core. When we teach sprinting here, we always teach what we call a neutral head. Neutral head means that the head is in alignment with the spine. So we try to discourage chin tucking, and we try to discourage throwing the head back at certain times in the race, okay? Now this is a silly little example, but bear with me for a second, okay? Is that a backpack you have on? All right, let's assume you had a backpack. If I took a shot put and put it in your backpack, all right, and told you to take off jogging, you could do that. Suppose you're jogging around and all of a sudden that shot put rolls to the other side of the backpack. What would happen to you while you're jogging? Would it throw you off a little bit? Exactly, but remember, your head weighs the same thing as that shot put does. So when you start jerking the head around and moving it, that's when you have disruptions and the body loses its ability to apply force in a predictable manner, okay? So that's why we teach wherever the back is, that's where the head is at any point in sprinting, okay? Now, even more important to us is the alignment of the hips, keeping the hips in what we call a neutral position as well. Now, if you go to your schools or your clubs and you walk around, you're gonna see that you have some kids who sprint with their hips here, and unfortunately, you have some kids who sprint with their hips here, all right? We call that an anatomy person would call that anterior pelvic tilt, but we call it butt out for obvious reasons, okay? And if you pay close attention, you probably have kids in your teams who walk, you know, and stand with their hips out a little bit, okay? Well, that's a problem. And the reason why that's a problem is because when the pelvis is out of alignment, the ability to apply force in the correct directions and the correct planes is compromised there, okay? All right, I'm not gonna make you stand up and do this, but if I have my pelvis tilted here, watch what happens when I try to get my knee up. See, it just won't go. On the other hand, if I keep my pelvis here, the knee pops up very easily. So a lot of times when you see athletes who can't get their knees up, and you're asking them to get their knees up and they just can't, a lot of times it's not that the knees aren't up, it's that the hips are out of position. So keeping your butt under you and keeping the pelvis, what we call neutral, is important there. So if you're leaning forward in the first couple of steps of your sprint, no problem, but the pelvis should still be in line with the spine. Once you're upright, that's great too, but the pelvis should always be in alignment with the spine. So we're always looking at the head, the spine, and the hips to always be in alignment with each other, and they never move independently of each other. Is that clear? That's key, okay? And I'll show you how we teach acceleration a little bit later, and that'll help to reinforce some of that. And the third thing globally that we look at is the rate at which we increase our turnover. So we all know that those first couple of steps, you know, they're quick, but they're not as quick as they could be. You know, we want to push out, and we start with a little bit of a slower turnover, and every step, as that race progresses, it gets a little bit quicker, and a little quicker, and a little bit quicker. But that rate of increase, that rate of frequency increase needs to be done very patiently. If at any point in time you step on the gas too quick, then bad things tend to happen, okay? So for example, when they're coming out of the blocks or coming out of a jump accelerator, you know, jump approach or whatever, if you hear, that's great. But if you hear something like this, where it happens all at one time, then typically you're gonna have problems, okay? So for example, if you're running, almost any time that you try to step on the gas too fast, this is what happens. Meaning the knees drop, the butt goes out, and then you've compromised your posture and you've compromised your range of motion. So what we teach our athletes to do is to increase your frequency patiently and never increase your frequency so fast that you end up sticking out the butt or dropping the knees, so that we never sacrifice. The range of motion should always be there. You see, that's one of the challenges in teaching sprinting, is most of the kids you work with, they think that the faster they move their feet, the faster they are, but that's not true, right? Yeah, you can just shuffle your feet in place, can't you? You know, so they think because their feet are moving fast, that's not true. Remember, frequency only produces speed if it's done with full ranges of motion and with correct postures. So if you've given up your posture, or if you've given up your ranges of motion in order to achieve frequency, then you've paid far too great of a price. You might think you're faster, your kid might sense that they're faster because their feet are moving faster, but as far as their actual way they're traveling, it's not the case. Every one of you at one time in your life has sat in the stands and watched a long jump competition. And there's always some kid who moves their legs really fast, you know? And if you're down there by the long jump runway, they look fast. When you get in the stands, and they just don't look as fast anymore. But then there's the other kid, the kid who doesn't look fast from the stands, but then you get down there real close and they're like, when they come down the runway, because that kid is expressing force through full ranges of motion. Am I being clear? Yeah, so that's the key thing here. Understand that we never compromise our ranges of motion and our posture in order to achieve frequency, okay? So those are the three key global things that we look at all the time. And every time we ever do a sprint in practice with any athlete, those are things that we always want to make sure are correct, okay? Now, the things we actually teach. Okay, we spend a lot of time here working on starts, okay? Maybe from our first track meet of the year last night, you might not be able to tell that we actually practice starts because you know how first meets are, kids make mistakes. But we spend a lot of time on it. And the reason why is because we feel very strongly that if you start correctly, then you're going to put yourself in position to accelerate. You know, I was a college track coach for a very, very long time, and sometimes you get a kid who comes to you with like really bad running mechanics. And like, how the hell did you learn to run that badly? And then you put him in a starting position and you watch them start and you're like, oh, now I understand. Because of the fact that they never started correctly, they never were able to develop good acceleration mechanics and running mechanics. On the other hand, if they start correctly, sometimes they'll accelerate correctly without you ever saying a word. So we feel that the start is very, very important in that regard. It kind of puts you in context and it saves a lot of coaching time. It saves a lot of coaching time. So when we put our athletes in starting positions, I'm not going to go into details in the start, but the things we always are looking for are displacement, meaning that we actually see the hips travel. And the second thing we always look at here is vertical versus horizontal. Okay, when you're a sprinter coming out of the blocks, or if you're a jumper pushing out on that first step of the runway, obviously if we push forward, we improve our momentum and our speed, correct? But there's also a vertical component. You see, that's a very commonly misunderstood thing. When you're coming out of a block, it's not just about pushing out, it's also about pushing up. There's a horizontal and a vertical component. Now, the horizontal component is very important because the horizontal component improves your time, helps you run faster. But the vertical component is what enables you to achieve technique and posture. Most athletes, this might surprise you, but most athletes, when they push out of the blocks, they typically push a little too flat. Like most athletes tend to. How many of you have a kid who stumbles when they come out of the blocks? We all have one, right? Or sometimes you have a kid who instead of stumbling out the blocks, you see the kid who gets wide with their feet coming out the blocks. You have one of those too? Those are both compensations and problems that result from pushing too flat. Now, I'll be honest with you. In this high school meet today, all right, I'll find, how many kids are going to run. Probably, in the 60 today, there's probably going to be about 100 kids running, all right? 190 something, boys and girls, okay? 190 is about 200 kids. Out of those 200 kids, there's going to be about 20 who are going to pop up out of the blocks, get too high in their first step. But there will be 100 of them, half of them, who will actually push too flat, and there will result in problems from that. So that's our philosophy here, is we're always looking at horizontal versus vertical. And we're making sure that even though we're pushing out, we still have a little bit of a vertical component so that they can feel comfortable. Remember, the time that you spend in the air is the time that you're getting your ankles dorsiflex and you're getting your knees up and so forth. So if you don't have air time, it's hard to hit the right positions, okay? Make sense? When I talk about air time in sprinting, sometimes coaches kind of balk, because, well, let me ask you this question. When your sprinters are sprinting, do you want their feet on the ground for a long period of time? Absolutely not. So if you're not on the ground, where do you have to be? You got to be in the air, right? You can only one or the other, right? So that's a key thing to understand, is that we need that little bit of an up as well as our out. And a lot of your stumbling, a lot of your sidestepping and those types of problems, it's not because the kids are popping up, it's because they're pushing actually a little too flat in the first step, okay? Now, when we teach acceleration, the second part of the sprint, what we teach there is we teach a progression of body angles. So obviously that first step, we're going to have a hard forward knee. The next step, it's going to be less and less and less and less and less until eventually when we hit maximal velocity, what we're seeing is pure vertical positioning, pure vertical postures there. Now, the way we do this is very important. What we teach here is our athletes, when they accelerate, the way that you progress through your your body angles, the way you change your body angles is with the vertical component. It's with the upward component of each step. So what we teach here is a climb, meaning that we're not trying to get tall by standing up, we're trying to get tall by pushing up. Excuse me, got a little bit of a cold. Let me get that frog out my throat. Apologize. Okay, so let me show you what I mean here. If I demonstrate it, it might be a little clearer. And by the way, I apologize. I would probably had a little PowerPoint together or something if I'd have known this morning I was going to do this.
Comment les affaires?
Hey, pas trop mal.
Pas trop mal.
T'as pris bien?
Les mains sont
Bien sûr.
J'ai des enfants qui me parlent.
Yeah, the Louisiana people be speaking French. He's a Shexnada too, by the way, but he doesn't want anybody to know about it. Anyway, okay, so let's assume you're coming out of the blocks or you're coming out of the back on your jump acceleration. Okay, so when I push, okay, here's my stance. Maybe I'm in full point. I push, and here's my body knee. So you can see the body knee, correct? Okay, now watch what happens when I take this step with my right foot. Watch and see what happens to my body knee. Did it change? I'm gonna take another step. See, so every time I take a step, what happens to my body angle? It increases. So what I'm doing here is I'm not standing up. I'm actually using my legs to push myself up. Okay. Now another thing to watch. Here I am. Now, if I had a camera on my belt buckle, all right, where would it take a picture of? It would take a picture of the ground, right? Okay, but watch what happens. As I push, each time I push, the camera angle increases, right? Until at the end, I have my butt underneath. So you see what we're doing is we're using the vertical components of our steps, to get ourselves up. So when we talk to our athletes about coming out of the blocks or accelerating on the jump runway, we talk to them about feeling like they're climbing. Like feel like you're climbing steps or feel like you're climbing a ladder. Because that's what I kind of did here, right? I got here and I actually just used my legs to kind of push myself up into a nice tall position. So I always feel like I'm pushing up at that point. The horizontal stuff takes care of itself. It takes care of itself. But the vertical stuff is the stuff that typically, as a sprinter jump coach, that you have to work on a little bit harder. Make sense? Okay, so that's a key component there. Now, to help you understand it a little bit more, let me show you the mistake. All right, this is the error that you often see. Okay, so let's say you get out the box or get out the start pretty good. And maybe you push for a couple of steps, all right? Now, I lift my head and I lift my chest. All right, now my head and my chest are up, but where's my camera still pointing? You see? And that's where your butt out postures come from. So anytime you have a kid who has that butt out kind of posture, if you watch their acceleration pattern really carefully, you'll see at some point in time their chest will just kind of pop up and the whole unit doesn't progress together. Remember we said head, spine, and hips need to move as a unit. When the head and the spine move and the hips don't, that's when you get those bad sprint postures. Okay? So those types of kids, you have to teach them to use the legs to get themselves up as opposed to the chest to get themselves up, okay? Am I being clear? And it's by far the most common error in sprinting. We get lots of kids who come here and that's kind of their problem, you know? And they're really good for like 20 or 30 meters, maybe 35 meters. And then when it comes time to produce the flight and push up more, that's when they hit a wall because they're not capable of doing that because of the poor postures. Right? We had a young lady last night, a real good sprinter who transferred here, and she's had a great fall, and her testing's off the charts. And she kind of had that problem. And we kind of fixed it in the fall, but what happens when you come back and you have 3 days of practice and then you have a track meet, it reverts back, right? So she's like killing everybody for like 35, 40 meters, and then it looks like she was standing still from 40 to 60, you know? Now she's gonna be fine, because we'll get back to practice and she'll remember what she did, you know, in the fall and whatever. But in the meantime, that's very common. So the idea of pushing up, climbing, is a key one there, okay? And again, anytime, and I'll be very frank with you, you know, I get probably 300 emails a week from coaches who are like, help me with my kid, you know? And I get the email, Coach, my sprinter sprints with their butt out. I say, well, check their acceleration. They're lifting the chest. Coach, I checked. It looks good. Okay, we'll send the video. And sure enough, when I get the video, I see boom, boom. You know, I see that real radical. And either the coach just missed it or probably didn't think it was important, but it's really important, okay? That's why at some point in time, I actually will have kids feel like they're kind of staying in here a little more than you want, just to kind of keep them from lifting their chest. Make sense? So if they understand that, now when we teach it, it's pretty darn simple. We get them on a wall. I'll put them on a wall like this. Okay. And just you do this on the wall. Okay. You feel that? Yeah, I feel it. You understand it? Yeah. Okay. Now I want you to sprint 20 meters at about 90%, and I want you to kind of feel that while you do it. And that's how we teach it. That's how we teach it. And if any time they do that, then no, that one doesn't count. It was a good one, and that's how we kind of teach it. Okay. So in short, that's how we teach acceleration. So basically, our checklist of things to teach: hit your start with the correct vertical versus horizontal, and understand how to push through the body angles correctly. All right. Now, max velocity. Once we hit top speed, that's simple. That's really just continuance. All right. So at max velocity, what we teach there is vertical pushing. So if you'll notice at the end, going back to what we did in acceleration, here early, we're progressing and pushing. If you watch my foot, I'm pushing kind of back and up. But when I get to this point, I'm pushing almost straight down into the ground. So when we get to max velocity, what we try to teach there is to maintain your openness, maintain your ranges of motion, maintain your posture, but push vertically. So I want them to always feel like they're not pushing back against the ground. I want them to feel like they're pushing down against the ground, because what we're trying to do again is to continue to produce the vertical components. Again, the horizontal components take care of themselves. That's inherent, that's natural to us as humans. But the vertical components in sprinting are the ones that you typically have to work on just a little bit harder. Now here in this meet today, you're gonna have a whole lot of people who come across that finish line looking kind of like that. And the reason why is, for all of them, is because at some point in the race, they did not produce the vertical components that you wanted to have. If I had my PowerPoint here today, I would show you a picture. And the picture is one I use a lot when I do clinics. It's a picture of Usain Bolt, and he's running the 100, I guess. I guess it's the 100, but he's running the 100. And he's beaten everybody else by about 2-3 meters. And he's kind of looking over his shoulder at him, the classic Usain Bolt cockpit kind of stuff, But the thing that's striking about the picture is not that Usain Bolt is 2 or 3 meters ahead of them. He's like this much higher than them. Meaning literally his shoulders are at the top of the heads of the other people. Now he's tall, but he's not that much taller than everybody else. So what does that tell you about him? What's he doing? He's pushing the vertical components of him are really good. So instead of him coming flat, he's always got a little subtle bounce to his sprint, and that's ultimately what you want. That's why he's struggling this so long. That's why he could run the 100 in less steps than anybody who's ever in history as well, because the vertical components are so good there. So in short, that's, hey coach. Hey, how you doing? Sorry, but we're kind of wrapping it up, but you're welcome to catch the last little bit. Right. But in any case, so just to kind of reiterate the whole philosophy of sprint mechanics teaching here, okay? Again, the global stuff, we're always looking at head postures and hip postures, looking for neutral pelvis. We're always looking for full ranges of motion and a patient progression in frequency. When it comes to skill teaching, when we look at the start, we look at out and up, vertical versus horizontal. We look for a correct progression of the body angles using increasing vertical components, and then at max velocity, we try to make the pushes purely vertical there. And that's in the short how we pretty much teach it. It's the same philosophy we use in the 100, the 200. In the 400, it's really no different. Of course, you have fitness to develop in the 400 as well, but the mechanics are the same. And it's the exact same philosophy we use in all of the jumping events, as far as the way we teach mechanics and progression on the jump runways as well. Now, there is one difference. In a sprint, it might take you 10 or 12 steps before you're up completely. Where in a jump, it's going to be like 5 or 6 steps. But the process is the same. It's just the number of steps invested in it changes, so distribution from time to time. And the nice thing about teaching it this way is that because philosophically you're teaching it the same to jumpers, sprinters, hurdlers, and everybody, well, they can all work out together. You can use the same teaching cues, you can use the same drills, you can use the same things and language with all of those different events. So that's what we try to do, is we just try to keep acceleration and starting and max velocity as simple as we can, give them a few basic things to teach, and we kind of go from there. Okay? Make sense? Now, I know a lot of times people say, oh, there's got to be more to it than that. No, the beauty of it is in the simplicity, because the kids come into the program and they feel, oh, well, if I just do these 3 or 4 things right and I train hard, I'm going to be fine, and that's how it typically works out, Now, I'll be honest with you, keeping it simple, it don't sell many tapes. It don't sell many DVDs. It don't, but ultimately, the simpler you keep it, the more aggressive your kids can be. Questions? No? You sure? I don't want the questions to come when you get out the door.
What kind of drills or what do you do to help them before they start?
Our number one starting drill is starting. Like literally, we really don't do drills. Like we just practice the start. And what I was saying, you weren't in here, is that the two things we look at hard in the start is the actual hips moving. We don't get caught up a lot on different block spacings and things like that. What we make sure is that the hips actually travel in the start. Because if you watch some kids, what they'll do at the start is they'll do this, but they don't really go anywhere. Yeah, the arms are moving, yeah, the knees coming up, but they're not really traveling. And the other thing we look at hard in the start is vertical versus horizontal. We try to make sure that there is a little bit of a vertical component in the start, because most of the problems in acceleration are not related to kids popping up. They're actually related to kids who actually push too low on the block, and then you get that little stumbling kind of effect. But honestly, we're not a big drill program. We try to practice the skill. So our number one, now we do different types of starts. We'll do 2 points and 3 points and block starts and so forth. But our number one starting drill is actually starting, just like our number one acceleration drill is accelerating. Our number one sprinting drill is sprinting. Any other question? Yeah, really, I understand. Sometimes complicating sprinting is sexy, and it makes for cool YouTube videos and DVDs and stuff like that. But again, the beauty is in the simplicity. Yes, sir.
You're doing all the core work, to get your kids ready to all the core
Yeah,
work.
I wouldn't say that it's a huge amount, but yeah, we typically do normally at least once a week. We do some type of circuit that's kind of an ab-based kind of circuit. But I'll be honest with you, most of the core work for sprinting that's necessary doesn't really come in the ab work. It comes in your weight room. Like if you're doing like a squat, and the force, the ability, the need to stabilize the core of your body while you squat, that's more difficult and more challenging than doing crunches and sit-ups. If you're doing a clean and you have to keep your torso in good alignment while you're doing the clean, that's more challenging than doing crunches and sit-ups. So we do those types of exercises, but I think most of your genuine true core development comes from you maintaining good technique in the weight room and the things you do there. But we do that stuff.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't count it as the most critical things we do for the core. Now, another thing that a lot of people don't understand about sprinting has a lot of rotations in it. When you're driving up your right knee, whether you realize it or not, it comes across your body. Your hips turn a little bit. When you're sprinting, your hips turn just a little. And then your shoulders turn very slightly as well. So there's a little bit, if you watch a sprinter from up above and you were watching their shoulders and their hips, you would see something like this going on. You would see kind of a winding and an unwinding of the body. So there's a lot of rotational stuff going on. And that's why when we train our sprinters, a lot of the exercises we do are not necessarily like this, but they're like this, like different kind of twisting moves and diagonal types of moves and so forth. So most of our genuine core stuff, we try to do more twisting, turning kind of movements as opposed to straight in one plane kind of movement. Okay.
During the season, do you guys, let's see, when do you lift weights during the season? Or do you lift like every other day, every 3 days, once a week?
Anytime we do a speed component on the track, we try to do a weightlifting component.
Oh, okay.
So if our schedule, it changes, but if we have like 2 big speed days on the track in a week, we'll have 2 big weightlifting days. If we have 3, then we'll have 3 weightlifting days. So we try to do our main weightlifting workouts after our main sprint workouts. The reason why is because, all of them are demanding on the nervous system. The nervous system is what makes you a good sprinter. It's not your muscles. And so therefore, if you're doing sprint work, which is really tough on your nervous system, we would prefer to do the weight work, which is tough on your nervous system, on the same day.
Yeah,
that way our nervous system gets easy days and hard days.
You do it after the sprint workout?
Oh yes, absolutely. Now don't get me wrong, some types of lifting before sprinting doesn't hurt anything. But if you're gonna do things that are heavy and slow like squats, they will wreck a sprint workout. Right. So you can't squat before you, yeah. So, in our weight program is, we try to keep it simple too. We have, because our kids train for months and months and months, we have lots of different exercises we use, but we're still grounded pretty much in cleans, snatches, and variations of the squat. Those are the ones that are by far most important to us.
You know, we train like his daughter, we train year round, you know, and,
Well, you know, I get coaches that ask me all the time, you know, in the weight room, what exercises do you need? You know, how many, you know, which is better, a clean or a snatch? Which is better, a pull or a clean? What's better, a squat or a front squat? Well, it doesn't matter as much as you think. It's about the variety. So if I'm coaching high school and I'm getting my kids out of basketball and I only have them for 2 months, I can teach them a clean and a squat and I'm done. That's all they're probably going to need. But if I have my kids from September all the way through July, well, you can't keep doing the same stuff over and over again. So that's when you need those variations. So when people ask me which is better, to do a clean or a snatch, both. Which is better, a front squat or a back squat? Both, you know, because you're just going to need the variety in the workout. So that's what it's not so much that one exercise is better than the other. It's the variety you need over the course of time is why we really make those changes. You know, we do our Olympic lifting like cleans and snatches and whatever throughout the whole year, from the first day till the day before nationals. You know, day before the finals at national, they're probably going to do some light cleans or something like that. But the squatting component we pretty much do only in the preseason. In season, when we drop our squatting, we go to a lot of jumps. What we'll do is we'll put light bars on their backs or dumbbells in their hands, and we'll have them do different types of jumping exercises. So we go more like the squat jumps and things like that. We try to stay away from the heavy slope things in season. Like all of our athletes in our sprint program, they did their last squat workout last Monday.
So
And they won't squat again.
everything else is speed workout, technique.
we do a lot of different variations. That's what we try to do.
Any questions? Any more questions? Appreciate it, fellas.
Appreciate it.
I hope I held up my end of the bargain. Again, I would have